way that empowers us today, and use it as a way to share our culture as well.
Wonderful idea, eh, Scott?
Thank you.
It's an awesome idea. And tēnā koe te tuahine. One question for you in particular.
Hi.
So it's not just having a portrait taken, right? It's actually taking somebody on a journey.
Really, it is. So we've done it at Te Ao Marama Māori Focus Unit, and the wonderful thing, it's been overseen by a beautiful woman called Hini Wirangi Kohu Morgan, who's created these amazing programs that pretty much, use our Māori identity as a way to unlock potential within these men. So they're learning taiaha, they're learning kapahaka, they're learning whai kōrero, they're learning whakapapa. So it seemed almost like meant to be that we could introduce our experience and kind of clip on at the end. The men are actually already doing a lot of the hard work already. They're doing, all-day classes, learning about these things. And it's a way for kind of to show them the potential that they know they have, but they also understand it much better as well. So because of the things that they're learning, it matches up with the internal changes they're making within themselves.
Wendell?
You mentioned earlier that some of them can be a bit shy, but whakamau about getting their pictures taken. How do you get them to? How do you coax them into doing that?
I remember during our pilot, we did about 28 men over 4 or 5 days, and I remember the fourth guy that came in was really shy, and we actually, I guess we do whakawhanaungatanga with everyone in our on our commercial side of our business, and so it's only natural that we do it as well with the prisoners. We actually were asking them a lot of questions, encouraging them to open up. It's really about reading. These people are whānau, and if you treat them like whānau, they respond like whānau. So making sure that the space was open. We had a facilitator present, but there wasn't, a massive thing of guards around us. It was a very open and an opportune time for them to be outside their comfort zone, which is good. But to share kind of kōrero about who they are and what their stories are.
Well,
we hope to
I was going to say, because we've only got 30 seconds left, I think. But look, your work is really extraordinary. I want to sort of sneak in that website so people can have a look for themselves.
Yes, you can find us at soldiersroad.nz or Soldiers Road Portraits on Facebook. We're having an exhibition showing all of this kaupapa and this work that we do in prisons at the end of January. It will be in Hamilton at the Meteor. And so if you want to see the work that we're doing and hopefully the work we can continue to do in prisons, then that'll be a great chance. It'll be the first time we've been able to show anything outside the prison.
Oh, absolutely wonderful. And when you do that, we may get you back on and we can...
definitely.
We can go through that again. Fantastic. Taineko Nordstrom, who with Vienna Nordstrom runs quite a unique business, Soldiers Road, and that website again is Soldiers Road, just rd.nz. I do urge you to go and have a look. But isn't that quite a unique take on both tikanga and photography, Scott? Quite extraordinary, huh?
Oh, it's amazing and beautiful pictures, and I think it's just awesome how it shows people what our old people used to look like. And can I just say that exchange between Taniko and yourself at the start of that was the example of giving it a go in Te Reo Māori, where she would have her name, I suspect, mispronounced a number of times by people, but you gave it a go, she corrected you, and there was no malice at all.
Perfect,
awesome.
Wasn't it? Perfect.
Kia ora, Scott. Hey, thank you so much for both being with me today. It's
Pleasure.
been wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Wendell and Scott Campbell, thank you very much for your time. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow at 3:45. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, hurry up and wait. The country is in alert level limbo for now, but the government's promising all things being equal, everyone outside of Auckland could go down a level next week, while the super city might be in for a few minor rule tweaks. With the school holidays looming, is it enough for business and tourism? Half a dozen men in their 60s and 70s are facing sex abuse charges related to alleged offending at an Auckland school dating back decades. An independent investigation is underway after 2 deaths and a serious injury at Auckland Port. And the Wallabies are crying foul over New Zealand's quarantine rules. A loophole in the Litter Act means some illegal dumpers are getting away with it. Don't forget, you can catch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. Both the opposition and Labour's coalition partner have slammed the decision to extend COVID-19 restrictions. The current alert levels have been extended for another week, with the Prime Minister saying more time is needed. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Cabinet will review Auckland settings again on Monday next week, with a view of moving down to level 2 if things keep tracking well. It is also agreed in principle that the rest of the country will move to level 1 then. But New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says the health advice is inconsistent and there's no sensible reason for keeping the rest of the country at level 2. Nationals leader Judith Collins says the decision seems political and she believes restrictions in the South Island have gone on too long. From Parliament, Yvette McCullough.
The government has ditched physical distancing rules on planes and public transport effective immediately. The Health Ministry says with face coverings and QR codes for contact tracing now mandatory, distancing won't be required at alert level 2 or above. Hamish Cardwell has more.
The rules apply to domestic flights and travel on trains, buses and ferries. The ministry says people should still keep some distance if possible and maintain good hygiene practices such as regular hand washing. Air New Zealand has released thousands of $50 fares in response to the announcement, and it is removing the fee it charges people to change domestic flights on travel booked up until the end of March next year. Jetstar says it will now resume domestic services from Thursday after suspending them a month ago. Ko Hamish Cardwell, tēnei.
It's been confirmed today the person who attended 3 gym classes in Auckland before testing positive for COVID-19 is a healthcare worker at the country's only quarantine hotel. Health authorities have urged 89 close contacts who attended the classes at Takapuna's Les Mills to self-isolate and get tested. The gym closed for a deep clean and reopened today. Owner Philip Mills says the gym has strict safety measures in place.
We have really got as good a safety measures as any business in the country, probably better than most. And we think that this is very important. We think that it's crucial that people are exercising.
Philip Mills says class teachers are among those self-isolating. The principal of Dilworth School says the allegations of sexual abuse at the school are appalling and deeply saddening, and the school is truly sorry. 6 men in their 60s and 70s with historical links to the school have today had charges filed against them on indecent assault, sexual violation and drug supply. The allegations date back to the 1970s through to the 2000s. Dan Reddix says the school waived its opportunity for name suppression so it could face up to its past and be open with its community.
There is no denying the issue of historical abuse has cast a dark shadow over our school, but it need not and it will not define us. I am hopeful and expectant that the enduring legacy of these historical issues will be a safer school community and a richer student experience.
Dan Reddick says no one charged is still involved with the school. The police are warning anyone who is helping an escaped dangerous prisoner evade capture risks being prosecuted. 22-year-old Katrina Epiha has not been seen since fleeing corrections staff at Middlemore Hospital early on Friday morning. Epiha, who has distinctive tattoos both sides of her face, was jailed for life with a 10-year non-parole period for the murder of Alicia Nathan in Christchurch in August 2017. The risk of an oil spill in Milford Sound is low despite a boat catching fire early this morning and sinking. The vessel, which was used for accommodation, was berthed alongside commercial crayfishing boats at a wharf in Deepwater Basin. No one was on board at the time. There was only a small amount of fuel on the boat and the Regional Council says oil spill equipment is in place around it. It's 4 minutes past 5. The All Blacks could be forced to take several rookie first fives to Australia for the Rugby Championship, with several of New Zealand's top players not keen to go on the extended 10-week trip. Rugby reporter Joe Porter has more.
RNZ understands a group of players have already told New Zealand Rugby they don't want to leave their young families for up to 10 weeks, which would likely include spending Christmas in quarantine upon their return. Those players include first fives Richie Mo'unga and Bowden Barrett. Mo'unga and his wife recently had their first child, while Barrett will become a dad side for the first time in the next month. Halfback TJ Perenara, who has a newborn, wants to stay in New Zealand, which could leave the All Blacks coach Ian Foster with a big hole to fill in the playmaker's role. Star wing Sevu Reece and his partner are also set to have their first child in the next month, and several other players with young children are also reticent to head across the Tasman, meaning it could be a vastly understrength All Blacks team that tackles the Rugby Championship. Ko Joe Porter Aho.
Relief was the overwhelming feeling for Austrian tennis player Dominic Thiem after winning his first Grand Slam. The world number 3 has produced a remarkable fight back for a 5-set win over German 5th seed Alexander Zverev at the US Open in New York. Thiem dropped the first 2 sets but won the next 3 to finally win a major, having lost 3 previous Grand Slam finals.
I put a lot of work in. I dedicated basically my whole life until this point to win one of the 4 majors, and now I did it. So that's also for myself a great accomplishment.
Dominic Thiem, that's the news.
Trouble in Milford Sound.
The boat is pretty much destroyed and they are extinguishing what's left.
Trouble at the gym.
When you're close to other people, indoors with poor ventilation, breathing hard, then that's exactly the kind of conditions where COVID can spread.
Trouble in Oregon.
One group of people and firefighters had to make a last-minute evacuation across a Forest Service road, and a snowplow had to go in front of them to remove all of the fallen and flaming debris.
Always topical. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Warnings and watches are in place for severe westerly gales in central and southern New Zealand and for heavy rain affecting Westland and Bulla today. In the west, from Northland to Porirua and the Hutt Valley, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country, scattered light showers today, rain at times tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairatapa and Wellington City, fine weather with high cloud at times, occasional showers south of Napier tomorrow. Bulla to Fiordland, also Canterbury, High Country and Stewart Island. Rain or showers, heavy at times, squally thunderstorms and hail possible in Fiordland from this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, excluding Kaikoura Coast, occasional showers from tonight. Kaikoura Coast, Canterbury Plains, Otago and Southland. Fine weather, high cloud at times, occasional showers for Southland and Otago spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers tomorrow. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, the alert levels are staying put for now, but the middle seat is back for sale and the Prime Minister's given a peek of the light at the end of the tunnel. But first tonight, police have arrested 6 men as part of an investigation into historical offending at Dilworth School in Auckland. The men have been charged with at least 20 serious offences that allegedly occurred across a number of decades. The school has fronted up to acknowledge issues within its gates and promises changes have been made. Nita Blake-Person reports.
We deeply regret what has occurred in our school's past and the detrimental effects on our old boys who suffered abuse in our care. We are truly sorry.
An apology from a school cast in a long shadow of sexual abuse allegations. Police have been investigating claims since a complainant came forward a year ago. They've since identified 17 victims of alleged abuse at Dilworth School. Police believe the offending spans several decades, from the 1970s to the early 2000s. Now, 6 men who are all in their 60s and 70s face a range of charges, including indecent assault, inducing an indecent act and supplying prohibited drugs. The Dilworth Trust Board Chair Aaron Snodgrass addressed media this afternoon conceding there has been a problem at the school.
Last year, I wrote to all old boys and parents, acknowledging and apologising for historic abuse, and also outlining what we are doing to lead the way in providing a safer school environment so the young men in our care can enjoy their education in a safe way as envisaged by our founder.
He acknowledged some old boys may still be dealing with issues from their time at Dilworth.
We established a confidential free listening service for old boys if they want to discuss their experiences with an independent clinical psychologist. And if they need further support, counselling can be arranged with a psychologist at no extra cost to them.
Dilworth is a private school which provides full scholarships for students to learn and board in a Christian environment. Speaking alongside Mr Snodgrass was the school's headmaster, Dan Redix, who's been in charge for nearly 18 months.
Naturally, as a father, an educator and a human being, the recent charges of allegations of historical sexual abuse are both appalling and deeply saddening. I cannot comprehend the trauma or pain those who have suffered abuse must have endured. And for this hurt, we are truly sorry.
He says safety improvements have been made at the school and students are encouraged to speak up and speak out against abuse.
There is no denying the issue of historical abuse has cast a dark shadow over our school. But it need not and it will not define us.
The school's lawyer addressed media before the leaders made their statements, describing what he called the rules of engagement. He said they wouldn't be taking any questions due to the charges being before the courts. The defendants will appear in court on the 5th and 6th of October. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And the Anglican Church has declined to be interviewed. It provided Checkpoint with a statement that says, the Anglican Bishop of Auckland, Ross Bay, is very sad to learn of these charges and is supportive of action that Dilworth School has taken to address complaints against former staff of abuse and to support survivors. Checkpoint has asked the Anglican Church if any of its clergy have been charged. It has not provided an answer. The country's alert levels are going nowhere for at least another week, with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern saying that while the plan is working, more time is needed. Cabinet will review Auckland's level 2.5 setting again next Monday, and if things are going well, the city will move down to level 2 a couple of days later. It's also agreed in principle that the rest of the country will move to level 1 next Monday, but that's contingent on cases tracking as they are now. But not everyone around the Cabinet table is happy with today's levels decision, with New Zealand First invoking the agree to disagree clause of the coalition agreement. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
A familiar routine, but against an unfamiliar backdrop. The Prime Minister stepping up to the podium with the levels decision at the Dunedin Centre and without the Director General. But it is on Dr Ashley Bloomfield's advice. Things are staying as they are for now.
Advice put to us today suggests we should be cautious about moving to level 1 immediately, and that it would be prudent to continue to monitor case numbers for a short while longer.
There's just one new case of COVID-19 today, a girl linked to the botany subcluster who was already in isolation. Ms Ardern says the subcluster is a potential trouble spot, and while there is no evidence of spread outside of Auckland, its tail poses a big risk.
We need to keep all of New Zealand safe. Modelling does suggest there is still a risk that cases could travel out of Auckland, that a bit of extra time gives us extra security against that.
One restriction has been eased. The government scrapped the requirement for physical distancing on planes and public transport while keeping masks mandatory. But New Zealand First is washing its hands of the level decision, agreeing to disagree.
This is costing hundreds and hundreds of millions. That we do this every extra week, we're not required to do it. The common sense of application of the people around this country is suggesting that it's not necessary for the South Island and for large parts of the North Island.
Leader Winston Peters says the health advice isn't sound or consistent.
The health of this country is critically important, but you need to have sound empirical arguments behind what you're doing. When you put up a model and say 1 in 5 is at risk, and it doesn't stack up against other analysis, then I think New Zealanders need to be told that.
He says there was never a need for physical distancing on planes with masks, and that caused unnecessary economic pain. ACT leader David Seymour agrees and says the extension of restrictions shows the government has failed in its response.
The government cannot have it both ways. Either we went hard and went early to develop a gold standard response, or we must stay in lockdown for yet another week due to a single outbreak.
He reckons Mr Peters' objections are pure politicking.
If New Zealand First wanted to have an impact on the management of COVID, they've had many opportunities to do it over 6 months, but there was no election then. Now there is an election, but it's too late for them to make a difference to New Zealanders' welfare.
National leader Judith Collins is concerned the Levels decisions are becoming political, and she wants Ms Ardern to front up with the full health advice.
if the Deputy Prime Minister is sitting and hearing the same advice as the Prime Minister, I think they might want to ask why it is that they have differing views, what they're basing it on.
She says New Zealand is in danger of using a mallet to crack a nut. And for the South Island, these restrictions have gone on too long.
I just really think it's really tough for people. I know people all try and do their best. Everyone wants to be safe. But I tell you what, I'm really worried about what's coming down the track for the economy. I'm really worried for New Zealanders.
But Ms Ardern says Treasury figures show payment and traffic data across Auckland and the rest of the country have bounced back to levels experienced under Level 1. She says this shows New Zealanders are adapting better and proves going hard and early is still the best approach for the economy. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
So the country will stay in alert level limbo for another week at least. Next Monday, the Cabinet will reconsider the alert levels, and as long as COVID cases are tracking as they are now, the country outside of Auckland will move to alert level 1 at 11:59pm that same day. The government will consider whether or not to change restrictions around gathering sizes in the super city. Now, if those tweaks are agreed, they will come into force on Wednesday the 23rd. But that means the country could be split across different alert levels, something the Prime Minister has previously advised against. So I asked the All of Government spokesperson, Grant Robertson, what's changed?
We've got an increasing confidence that we have this outbreak in Auckland under control. We're obviously seeing very small case numbers in the last few days, and as long as we continue to see that, then we've got a level of confidence that we can move the rest of the country to level 1. Obviously, in terms of the Auckland area itself, we want to move cautiously. We would still be asking Aucklanders, as we are now, that when they travel to take their Auckland status with them and make sure they continue to be careful. But our confidence grows. The advice we have is that as long as we can continue to see these case numbers, then we can move the rest of the country to level 1.
Because, and I'm going to read you a quote from the Prime Minister here, on the 24th of August when she was queried about moving the country to 2 different levels, she said, "I absolutely understand the sentiment that sits behind that. It does make sense except for one issue, and it's the one you've just raised, Minister, and that is regional travel. There are many people and businesses who will want to enter and leave Auckland once it is at level 2, and many others will want to see the benefit that comes from our biggest city moving around the country." And she went on to say that that obviously brings risks, and that is why she was keeping some kind of, compatibility between the regions. So you're going against your own advice and thinking, are you not?
No, we're not. I mean, obviously the advice evolves, and as I say, at that point in time, we had larger case numbers, we had less certainty about what the perimeter of this particular outbreak was. We now have the advice that's clear on that. The numbers have been coming down significantly. And look, we've also been seeing fantastic compliance with things like mask wearing on aeroplanes and on public transport and so on. So we know that we can now move forward. Clearly, we'll keep an eye on those case numbers. We'll obviously look to see what we can do in Auckland as well. But as we take the advice, we look at the evidence that's in front of us, and we're confident that we can make this move in a week's time.
So Aucklanders can go down the island and go to a rugby game or a wedding and then travel back to Auckland?
As I say, we continue to give Aucklanders, Aucklanders can travel now, as you know, and we continue to give them the advice that they should take their Auckland status with them.
That's only advice, though, isn't it, Minister? And we know from our experience with the Mount Roskill cluster that people do not always follow advice.
They don't. That's absolutely true, and it's the reason why we continue to have some restrictions up in Auckland beyond what we have here now. But we are getting to the point now where we're down to 1 to 0 cases a day. So long as we stay there, we've got the confidence to move forward.
You still don't know how a number of those people caught their infections, though, do you? So there's plenty of missing pieces from the puzzle. How many are there where you've got genomically linked cases, but you don't actually know where the physical contact came from? How many of those have you got still?
Look, there will still be a number, and the issue is we may never know. But bear in mind the alert level framework has been set up so that we can move down the alert levels while there are still cases. The criteria is to make sure that we've got any outbreak under control, and we have the ability to stamp out anything that does arise. So,
but you could still be missing.
We had to be at zero, or we had to have the complete information set in order to move. We've done pretty well with our contact tracing, but yes, you're correct. There isn't an epidemiological link between every single case, but the genomic sequencing we're now doing gives us a lot of confidence that we're dealing with a single outbreak here.
How many subclusters do you not have that physical link for? So you've got the Botany one, you've got Joe Williams. Is there more on top of that?
I'm not aware of any more than beyond that. Obviously, the work with Mount Roskill has led to its own subclusters as well. But as I say, this is the advice we get, Lisa. Neither you nor I are either an epidemiologist or a genomic scientist. What we do know is that the information we have from the genomic sequencing is that this is all linked to the same outbreak. Epidemiologically, that's the work that goes on. But right around the world, we know that we can trust the scientists when they tell us if these clusters are linked together.
Was the Director General entirely happy with removing social distancing on planes and public transport?
It was actually his recommendation, yes.
So it's not to do with the fact that we've got the school holidays looming and a lot of the people in the tourism industry have been agitating for this. Nothing to do with that?
No, in fact it was, as I say, it was his recommendation. I mean, clearly over time the advice in this area has evolved. Originally we were very focused on physical distancing. Then when masks came along, we were told that we needed to keep both of them in play. The compliance with mask use has been excellent, and the Director General's advice has evolved to now say he believes we can move forward. He's worked closely with Air New Zealand around their overall health and safety and making sure that they're doing all of the right things to assure that safety. So this was, in fact, exactly his advice.
So the health worker infected who works at Jet Park, they have been to the gym, right? And obviously there are not the same restrictions on group numbers at the gym. Is this a mistake? Because you've now got a whole lot of close contacts at that gym who now have to go into isolation. Is it a mistake?
Lisa, I'm not in receipt of the information to say that it is definitely the person who was the health worker who went to the gym. What I do know about the health worker is obviously there are plenty of rules in place around how they use PPE, what they do inside the facility. We've now got the regular checking, which means that this person tested negative last week and positive this week. And so we have to rely on people to be able to follow those rules within the facilities. But we know internationally that a number of health workers, despite the best efforts, have ended up getting COVID. There's protocols around PPE use, but they're not going to be perfect.
Okay, we can talk a little bit more about that worker shortly. Regardless of who the infected person is at the gym, is it wrong not to have limitations on numbers at gyms, given the situation we now see ourselves in? Because as we know from people who are epidemiologists, that it is the perfect environment for spreading viruses.
And those gyms have very significant criteria and protocols that they have to meet. So it's not unrestricted in terms of the numbers of people who go there. And gyms, and there are many other environments, not just gyms, where it's possible.
So is a gym class a gathering? Is there a limit on 10 people in a gym class? Is it a gathering?
So they need to be, my understanding, Lisa, is they need to be in bubbles within a gym class. There can be more than 10 people in the class, but that's similar to having more than 10 people in other types of environments like bars and restaurants and so on as well. And so those rules are in place. They've worked well. This is not a suggestion that someone got infected at the gym. It's a suggestion that they went there. They have close contacts. We're now chasing up the close contacts. It's exactly what we do in all of the cases.
It's about the environment in which it can spread, though, isn't it? Because the other place is swimming pools, where we're having reports, again, where there are people cheek to jowl at swimming pool events with kids' swimming lessons. And also, if you've had a wander on Ponsonby Road of an evening, if you've been up there this Saturday, it's absolutely heaving. People are clearly not following social distancing in many cases, aren't they?
Well, I think those who are running facilities, be they gyms or bars or restaurants, know what their obligations are. And there has to be a certain sense of personal responsibility here. You know, we're asking people to take particular precautions to help ensure we don't see spread of the virus. And we can only all do our best to make sure that we comply by physical distancing. It isn't always completely easy or completely possible, but we're just asking New Zealanders to take a bit of personal responsibility alongside all of the other rules that we have.
In respect of the healthcare worker who is infected, so that's been genomically linked to the Auckland cluster, and we know that obviously people from the Auckland cluster are in that quarantine hotel. What contact did this person have with those people infected with this particular strain?
So that's been looked into at the moment. We're reviewing the staff logs, the swipe card data, the CCTV footage to map the person's movements so that we can understand exactly who they came into contact with and make sure that, we understand that. All the staff are being retested. The people working in these facilities are our front line against the virus, and so from time to time they will come into contact with it. And as I said, overseas we have seen cases like this emerge. We just have to keep sticking to the protocols there.
So as yet you haven't identified direct contact? As yet you haven't identified direct contact with those cases?
No, that's what's been worked through at the moment.
Is there a fault in the system here? Because this person was picked up during routine testing, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Okay, so every day they have a health check, don't they? Where they clock in and say whether they've got any symptoms or they're feeling unwell. So this person obviously had a test the week before and a test this week, and at no point felt unwell. So could have been infected for a few days going to work.
I mean, that is potentially possible, but we do the testing weekly. That's a sensible protocol. It's not really possible to test people every single day. That's why we do the health checks. This is actually an example of the system working because the person did test negative last week. We've now given them another test and they tested positive. That's exactly what we're trying to pick up here. The system then kicks into gear. We follow up with all of those people who work around them. They're being retested. We take a look at all of the CCTV footage so we can see who they've interacted with, where they've been, and that'll build the picture up for us of whether they have had any contact with somebody who is from the existing cluster. So it's actually the system working. It's never ever going to be 100%. Internationally, we know that. This is the front line against the virus, and it will happen from time to time.
A lack of symptoms is the real problem, isn't it, Minister, when you put the country at two different alert levels? You could have someone leaving Auckland who's not immediately symptomatic, going to a large gathering down the line and then becoming a super spreader and heading back to Auckland. That is the risk you faced with the prospect of putting the country into two different levels next week, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what this requires is the whole system to work well. So we need to be testing plenty of people.
And there are no guarantees it will, are there?
Well, there's no guarantees in life, Lisa, but we're doing our very best to have a system where we test as many people as possible. We've got good contact tracing, that people follow the rules about washing their hands, physical distancing, wearing masks. All of those things put together mean that we've had very limited number of cases in recent days. We're doing well here, and we can make sure that we can build on the gains we've made if everybody does stick to those rules.
Can you put your Sports Minister's hat on for a second and just tell me if you've got any sympathy for the Wallabies who are complaining about the quarantine restrictions affecting their training prospects?
Look, I mean, we're working with New Zealand Rugby to make sure that we can get, both teams to be in the best state possible when it comes to playing these games. Obviously, the Australian team have been playing in their equivalent of the Super Rugby competition, so they must be fairly match fit, I would have thought. But we'll keep working with New Zealand Rugby and them to give them the best possible chance to be at the peak of their form when they come to play here.
And that was Grant Robertson ending that interview with the Sports Minister hat on. Before that, he was the all-of-government spokesperson. It is 28 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Love your feedback on what you think about the plan to adjust alert levels. We're all in the alert levels that we're in for at least another week. They'll be reviewed next Monday. And then potentially the rest of the country, except Auckland, will go down to level 1. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Auckland Council has launched an independent review to find out if there is a pattern of failure in health and safety at its ports. Mayor Phil Goff says 2 deaths in recent years and 1 serious injury are cause for concern, and he wants a close look at the port and its operations. Jill Bonnet reports.
Pala'amo Kalate was fatally injured while working on a ship at Ferguson Container Terminal a fortnight ago, the latest incident in recent years at the port. The council owns 100% of Ports of Auckland's shares, but it's not a council-controlled organisation. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff has a blunt message for the company.
What I really want to have is some certainty around whether we have in place on the wharves the health and safety regime that we need. The level of fatalities and injuries would suggest not.
He says Maritime New Zealand and WorkSafe share responsibility for port investigations.
We now need an overview, something that WorkSafe and Maritime Authority don't do, because each looks at different spheres of how the accidents may have happened in the waterfront area. I want a good overview to see if there is any systemic failure that the ports need to address.
The Maritime Union's Auckland branch secretary, Russell Main, welcomed the move, but says the review must report hazards urgently.
What has to happen is that any systematic failures or anything that are identified, there is immediate remedial actions put in place on an interim basis. We believe that the culture of productivity over safety has to be addressed immediately. We believe the hours of work has to be addressed immediately.
He says a remedial notice from Maritime New Zealand last week was the first he'd seen at the ports in almost 50 years. He says the exclusion zone it imposes near the cranes shows the workers shouldn't have been in the area when the accident happened a fortnight ago. Ports of Auckland will pay for the review, but the reviewer and terms of reference will be decided by the council. Phil Goff says there are some serious questions that need to be answered.
I've specifically looked at the track record in terms of prosecutions, two of which made their findings this year, and I'm unhappy about the fact that anybody goes to work and doesn't come home because the work environment has caused their death.
For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a storm brews over when and where next month's Bledisloe Cup tests will be played. New restrictions on social gatherings come into force in the UK as the country grapples with a second wave of COVID-19. And a haunted Otago hotel, home to the Rose of St Baffin's ghost, shuts its doors for the first time in 140 years. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. If you've had an encounter with that ghost, do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now, though, to get to the headlines with Susanna.
The government's decision to extend the country's alert levels by at least another week has been criticised by both the opposition and Labour's coalition partner. New Zealand First Leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says the health advice is inconsistent, while Nationals leader Judith Collins says the decision seems political. Most of the country is set to move to alert level 1 next Monday, but Auckland will remain at a higher level. Government spokesperson Grant Robertson says they have an increased confidence the current outbreak is under control, but he told Checkpoint they want to move cautiously with the region, and Aucklanders will still be advised to take their regional alert level status with them if they travel. Physical distancing rules are no longer required on planes and public transport. The Health Ministry says with face coverings and QR codes for contact tracing now mandatory, distancing won't be required at alert level 2 or above. 89 people who attended 3 gym classes at an Auckland gym have been urged to self-isolate and get tested after a COVID-19 case also attended. It's been confirmed the person who went to the classes at Les Mills in Takapuna before testing positive is a healthcare worker at the country's only quarantine hotel. Dilworth School has established a dedicated committee to oversee its response to the historic abuse allegations revealed today. 6 men, now in their 60s and 70s, with former links to the school, have been charged with indecent assault and other charges, many relating to underage boys. A new documentary which shows clips of the Christchurch mosque attacks has received an increased age rating following a complaint. The Social Media Dilemma started screening in New Zealand on Netflix late last week with no warning and a 7 years plus rating. The streaming service agreed to raise the age to 13 and include a warning about the scenes from the shootings following a request from the chief censor, David Shanks. It refused to remove the scenes. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, what have you got for us today? Some numbers about services, and you're telling me that their numbers are a lot worse than the manufacturing industry ones since lockdown.
I come with more economic indicators today, and today is the BNZ Performance of Services Index, or the PSI. This is sort of a companion survey with the PMI, which I spoke about on Friday, and there's some interesting things going on with this particular result. First of all, as you might probably expect, the PSI did take a knock over the month of August. That's in light of those recent restrictions, and that's because many hospitality businesses couldn't really trade as normally because of social distancing requirements and things like that. All this amounted to the PSI falling 7 points, which tipped the index into contraction territory. So that's a reading below 50, and that comes after 2 months of solid growth in the PSI. We've also seen a continuation of a trend that we saw in the PMI on Friday, and that is weak employment intentions. We've now had 6 months on the trot here where the PSI employment sub-index has been below 50, which actually points to jobs being shed in the industry. What is really interesting about this latest result, though, is actually the regional breakdown. Yes, you'd probably expect that Auckland, the services sector there, would have fallen quite a bit. It also fell a little bit in Christchurch, but perhaps probably the biggest surprise that it was the Otago Southland region, which actually had the worst performance last month. BNZ said this is probably because of the Auckland tourist effect. With the reimposition of travel restrictions, it really put a lid on domestic travel. And when you have towns like Queenstown, which rely so heavily on tourism, they were disproportionately affected by those recent restrictions. If there is some upside from this result, it's that BNZ senior economist says that despite these signals of a contraction, the result is still consistent with underlying economic recovery. What he's really saying is that if you compare this result with what we saw back in April and May, it really isn't that bad, and we're still on the path to recovery, and he expects that the result for this month will be markedly better than what we saw for August.
Okay. Some other data showing that the pandemic has been a bit of a spur for business creation.
Yeah, the accounting software Xero, they've revealed some trends today that's picked up, and it's picked on these trends amongst its users in New Zealand, the UK and Australia. And they say amongst many of the business casualties they've seen during the pandemic, there's actually been a healthy demand for systems that relate to e-commerce and actually managing expenses. And this is because more people are looking to set up businesses. And this may seem like a bonkers idea. This may not be the right time to be setting up businesses. The idea of actually going to your bank and taking out a business loan makes me sort of shiver, but that's probably because I don't have quite the appetite for risk that some of these other people do. But the reason why this might be happening is I got this idea from a small business advocate. He created this forum online and had hundreds of thousands of people engaging with it. And one of the trends he noticed was that for those people who lost their jobs due to COVID, they didn't want to rely on someone else giving them a job. They really wanted to take control of their financial futures. And I've seen this, and there's been plenty of anecdotes I've heard about this.
And we did a lovely story last Friday, Nita Blake-Person did, on a woman who used her redundancy payment to set up a sweet shop.
Yeah, well, I spoke to a couple of guys a month or two ago. They used to work for Green Cabs, which was put into liquidation during the pandemic. Well, they'd spent quite a bit of money, obviously, buying their taxis. They felt that there was still going to be a market out there for those low-emission, zero-emission taxi services. And they thought, what the hey, why not? They decided to, let's just launch this business and see how we go. Because they were using their own money. They felt like they weren't going to lose that much. And they thought, let's just see what we can make out of this. It's better than just sitting around and doing nothing. So I think all of this speaks to the fact that a lot of people, they're just trying to create opportunities for themselves. It's a very trying time. And like the story you mentioned on Friday, hopefully we can see some more successful stories to come out of this in the months to come.
So what have the numbers been telling us today, Nicholas? So
yeah, the NZX Top 50, that's up 1/3%, or by 43 points to 11,791. Our dollar is at 66.9 US cents, 91.6 Australian, 52.2 British pence. And gold is up a touch to $1,945 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. Let's head to the UK now, and new restrictions on social gatherings have come into force as the country grapples with a sharp rise in COVID-19 cases. Over the weekend, there were more than 6,800 new cases, and numbers are doubling about every 7 days. Here's the ABC's Samantha Hawley.
The summer COVID reprieve is now over. Across the weekend, more than 3,000 new cases were recorded on consecutive days. Peter Openshaw, a professor from Imperial College London, is a member of the scientific group advising the government on COVID-19.
The main point is that we must act fast because it's so much harder to get this sort of thing under control if you delay even a few days. It's potentially going to be quite dangerous now at this particular moment.
What will be concerning the British government most now is that the number of cases is doubling every 7 days.
The reproduction number has now jumped. It was down at about 0.5 at its best during the summer. It's now 1.7. So that's 1.7 people for every person who's infected, and that means exponential growth.
From today, gatherings of more than 6 people are illegal. But it didn't stop groups partying on the weekend.
It does feel a little bit like you was encouraged to go out, eat, drink, we have to get the economy going, and now it's a bit like it's all your fault.
Since the start of the pandemic, the British government has been criticised for its mixed messaging. But Boris Johnson has been adamant he will not introduce a second national lockdown. Some scientists say it may be unavoidable as the cold winter months descend. Robert Buckland is the Justice Secretary.
Well, look, as the Prime Minister said, going to a national lockdown would indeed be a nuclear option.
The British government is facing questions over 2 leaked reports. One reveals the virus is starting to take hold in the nation's care homes again. The Department of Health document reportedly shows outbreaks have occurred in 43 homes. Another shows the government's COVID testing program is in chaos, with a backlog of more than 180,000 swabs. Maria van Kerkhove from the WHO says the virus has a long way to go.
I mean, if we look at the proportion of the population that is actually still remains susceptible, only about 10% of the world's population has been exposed and has some evidence of infection, which means that most people remain susceptible.
Across the Channel, there is a concerning rise in case numbers too. France is faring particularly badly, with around 10,000 cases a day, the highest number recorded since the pandemic began. It could take at least 3 weeks to determine whether the new restriction on gatherings here is working to reduce the trend in Britain.
And that was the ABC's Samantha Hawley with that report. It is 19 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The National Party is promising a $1.9 billion education package if elected into government. That includes almost $500 million for students who need extra learning support. Political reporter Charlie Drever was at the announcement in Christchurch.
National leader Judith Collins chewing the fat with student teachers at the New Zealand Graduate School of Education. And under National, she says there will be a lot more of them.
We are committing to an extra 2,000 primary school teachers in our classrooms. This is a massive increase, and I would expect that every parent, every child and every teacher will be saying that National understands education.
The National Party is also promising smaller class sizes in primary and early childhood education. Also $150 million over 4 years to fund about 6 million additional teacher aid hours. Education spokesperson Nicola Willis says the party is committing about $500 million to additional learning support for schools.
Children with sensory challenges often require different resources in the classroom. It may be that teachers want to access a particular course or a particular set of supports for that child. It will vary from school to school. Key to this policy is we trust schools and we trust teachers to know what their students need.
Judith Collins says National also plans to have at least 25 new partnership or special character schools.
And these schools will be chosen on the basis of what they do around for Pacifica and Maori children, what they can specially do for Pacifica and Maori children, what they can do for children with special learning needs. If they want to specialise in that, we want to talk to them.
And she says the party will do away with school zone rules introduced by the current government. Labour's education spokesperson Chris Hipkins was asked to comment on National's policy, but declined. But New Zealand First leader Winston Peters was happy to put the boot in.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. Better late than never. I mean, they've had a road to Damascus experience after 9 years of nothing.
Winston Peters says imitation is the highest form of flattery, referring to his own party's policy for more teacher aid hours and learning support. From Christchurch for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
There's a storm brewing over when and where next month's Bledisloe Cup tests will be played. The Wallabies have cried foul over New Zealand's quarantine restrictions, saying they won't play before the 17th of October. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the details are still being ironed out. Sally Murphy reports.
Kick-off is tipped to be sometime in the middle of October, but there's already a tussle over the exact date. Wallabies coach Dave Rennie says one of the suggested dates for the Bledisloe is October 10. He says that wouldn't work with New Zealand's quarantine requirements.
Yeah, New Zealand Rugby's got an expectation that we jump on a plane the day after the Super Rugby final, have 2 weeks in quarantine where we can't prepare as a team and then play a test 7 days later. And under those quarantine arrangements, I can assure you we won't be playing a test in New Zealand that weekend.
But sports commentator and former Wallaby Peter Fitzsimons says that's not his decision.
When he says, my team won't be playing under those circumstances, it's actually not his fault. He's an employee of Rugby Australia. Rugby Australia needs those games to go ahead to make the money to keep the ship afloat. It'll be a decision made by Rugby Australia, not made by Dave Rennie.
When they get here, the Wallabies will have to isolate for 3 days before they can form a bubble of 15 and start training. A few days later, they can train as a group of 25, provided they've all tested negative. Sports Minister Grant Robertson says they'll likely be housed in the Garden City.
And the most likely location for them will be in Christchurch, and it will be in a dedicated isolation facility, and they'll be able to bus to and from their training ground.
But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the exact logistics are still being worked through.
Keeping in mind that for games between New Zealand and Australia, that is a different risk profile for teams from Australia than, for instance, the likes of South Africa and Argentina, where, for instance, we already had team members who had tested positive for COVID. So I do believe that we'll be able to find a workable solution so that we can make the Bledisloe Cup happen.
National's Mark Mitchell says New Zealand's at risk of losing the hosting of the 2 matches because of its rules.
The government has to really respond a lot quicker, support the codes and making sure that that we can still adhere to our managed isolation and quarantine rules, but set things up so that we can host these international events. We've lost the Rugby Championship, we can't afford to lose Bledisloe matches.
Hospitality New Zealand Chief Executive Julie White says it's vital for the industry that they are held here.
It's a sense of occasion, watching their national sporting team. That's what the hospitality venues bring. This is just so important that we get this right. We not only get to experience it here domestically, as in hosted in New Zealand, but we need this commercially for our members.
NZ Rugby's boss Mark Robinson told Checkpoint the match could even be played on election day, something the Prime Minister says she isn't concerned about.
I think that New Zealanders are perfectly able to engage in the Bledisloe Cup and an election. I'll be trying to do the same.
For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
A haunted Otepote hotel, which was built in 1882, has closed for the first time after a business deal went awry. The Vulcan Hotel has been an iconic tourist attraction in the once bustling gold mining town of St Bathans, which now has less than 10 living inhabitants. Tess Brunton has more.
Jude Kavanagh wasn't perturbed about owning one of New Zealand's most haunted hotels, hidden away on a lonely road in the heart of the Maniatoto. More than 100 years ago, Lady of the Night Rosie MacDonald worked out of room 1 and was paid in miner's gold. But one night she was robbed and murdered, and Mrs. Kavanagh says her ghost never left.
You just see shadows all the time, things being shifted. Things come off the wall, lights going on and off, but she wasn't nasty, no. And a lot of people got different experiences that stayed there. like being pressed down in the bed gently or their chains being pulled round their neck.
While Jude and Michael Kavanagh have been part of the hotel since 2001, health concerns got in the way and they put it on the market. In December last year, she says Brendan Richards was ready to lease to buy, and they prepared to say a fond farewell to their beloved hotel. But about 3 weeks ago, everything changed.
He kept on putting it off to come up with the money, and then it just got too much after nearly 10 months, and he just walked out and took the licence with him, so we've had to go for another licence.
So without an ability to sell alcohol, and with the foreign electricity and FPOS accounts also going with Mr. Richards, the Vulcan Hotel has been forced to close its doors.
It breaks your heart, really. It wouldn't have been closed in 140 years at least. And it's a destination. People come to the Vulcan and to see the Blue Lake. People from overseas everywhere, and very disheartened to see it close.
Brendan Richards declined to comment, saying the matter is with his lawyers. But Jude Kavanagh says the Rose of St Bathans ghost is unlikely to remain alone for much longer. She expects a new lessee will open it within the next couple of weeks before it returns to market next year. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
A lot of you getting in touch about Rose the ghost. Keep it coming. Text us on 2101. We'll get to them shortly. More than 1 million New Zealanders took up the challenge today of using Te Reo Māori for the first time ever National Māori Language Moment. With COVID-19 restrictions putting a stop to the annual Māori Language Week parades, the Māori Language Commission instead encouraged people to use the reo in some way, shape or form at noon. And the nation responded with 1 in 5 New Zealanders registering to take part. Workplaces and schools across the country got in behind the kaupapa tu waiata, kōrero o whakarongo te reo Māori for Te Wātuku Reo Māori, the Māori Language Moment. Miriana Johnson has more.
As the clock struck noon, all 130 students and staff at the Wellington-based drama school Toi Whakaari belted out their school waiata, Toi Whakaari e. School director Tania Heke says they chose to sing the waiata to celebrate Te Wātuku Reo Māori because it is the one thing all staff and students could do well. And the whole school got singing, with the waiata filling the entire atrium. Taking part was student Waitahi Aniwaniwa McGee from Ngāti Wai, Ngāti Maniapoto, Tuwharetoa and Ngāti Tama ki te Tauihu.
I haven't yet embarked on my reo journey or finished it. I've begun it but I haven't finished it yet. I think that's a life thing, but I appreciate this week because it helps remind me how important it is.
She says Te Reo Māori has a lot to offer.
I believe Te Reo Māori brings spirit and poetry and spirituality to existence, you know, like aroha. It's not just love, it's to share a breath, it's to give but to take, and there's just so much poetry and depth to Te Reo Māori.
Meanwhile, in Masterton, TBI health physiotherapist Davide Castorina organised a kōrero at midday, where kaimahi, or staff, got together to introduce themselves in Te Reo Māori and their favourite word. Mr Castorina chose the kupu, or word, tautoko, support, which he says was really relevant to the kaupapa of supporting one another.
Majority of my colleagues are not real speakers, so it was good to express we were all there to support each other, so not to be whakama and be brave, be courageous.
Davide Castorina is originally from Italy, but is committed to learning Te Reo Māori for his tamariki, who have Māori whakapapa. He will also be part of a presentation to the wider TBI organisation on the whare tapa whā, the Māori health model, later this week, as part of the company's contribution to Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Te Taurawhiri, the Māori Language Commission, held a zui mano, a Zoom meeting with 1,000 participants where they shared karakia and inspiring kōrero to mark the Māori Language Moment. However, over 10,000 people tried to join the Zoom meeting at once, unfortunately causing it to crash multiple times. Te Tauta Whiri Chief Executive Ngahiwi Apanui apologised to those who couldn't join. He says they didn't expect to have so many people joining the Māori language moment.
We were ecstatic about that, but I think I'm happier because it confirms to us that the value we've been trying to build for Te Reo over the last 4 or 5 years has now happened. So it's really a vindication in that way. But with all of these things, right, there's always a tomorrow. So the tomorrow for us really is, okay, how do we turn all of that value into speakers of Te Reo Māori?
The Māori Language Commission aims to have 1 million speakers of Te Reo Māori by 2040. For those wanting to give Te Reo Māori a go this week, Te Tauta Whiri has plenty of rauemi or resources for people to draw upon. Nō reira, kia kaha Te Reo Māori o hoa mā karawhiua. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
Councils are frustrated that a loophole in the current Litter Act is allowing more illegal dumpers to get away with it. And the agency Keep New Zealand Beautiful is warning that with rubbish disposal costs set to rise, the problem is likely to get worse. Ruth Hill reports.
The Cardrona River near Wanaka has graced thousands of postcards and cake tin lids over the years. But what the pictures don't show you are the piles of stinking garbage hidden behind the lupins and bush. The group Clean Up Cardrona organised a litter pick-up on Tuesday to mark Keep New Zealand Beautiful Week. Coordinator Christine Thompson says the 18 volunteers bagged more than a tonne of trash along the river walks, which are popular with families, dog walkers and horse riders.
Bits of dead animals, dead fish in plastic bags. We found lots of household rubbish, camping rubbish, bottles, old furniture. Just disgusting that people think they can just go down there and tip it out. The transfer station is practically at the entrance of this area.
Their most disturbing find were body parts from a dead horse scattered over a couple of kilometres.
It would seem that somebody thought, well, we'll put a bit of the horse up here and we'll put another bit of it down here and nobody will notice.
The day after the clean-up, Mrs Thompson was riding her horse by the river when she spotted a man scraping garden waste out of his ute parked in a byway.
Because I was by myself, I didn't like to approach him, but, gave him the evil eye, but he didn't seem to feel too guilty. In fact, he gave me a wee wave as he left. If we don't try and stop people from doing it, the whole place is just going to turn into one giant tip site. I'm pretty angry about it, actually.
Mrs Thompson passed on the ute's registration plate to the council, but the driver may never be fined. Under the Litter Act, councils can use CCTV footage and licence plates to investigate, but infringement notices can only be issued where a litter control officer catches someone in the act or has reasonable cause to believe such an offence has just been committed. Local Government New Zealand President Stuart Crosby says removing the word just would make the law easier to enforce.
You have to be Johnny on the spot, and of course it's very difficult, if not impossible, to have our bylaws officers, for example, out and about all the time looking for people that litter.
Auckland Council gets over 1,000 reports of illegal dumping each month and spends almost $5 million a year dealing with litter. Yet in the last financial year, it issued just 365 infringement notices of between $100 and $400 each. Senior Waste Enforcement Advisor Jan Eckersley says her team uses licence plates to track down vehicle owners, but it's tricky if the owner claims not to know who was using the vehicle at the time.
From our point of view, it would be easier if we could infringe the owner of the vehicle and have them be responsible for any littering or dumping that happens from their vehicle. But we're not allowed to do it that way. The Act doesn't give us that power.
Keep New Zealand Beautiful Chief Executive Heather Saunderson says most councils don't bother enforcing the Litter Act because it's too hard. She says CCTV cameras are usually only useful as a deterrent, and a limited one at that.
Typically offenders, once they find out that an area has CCTV, they just move on to the next spot that doesn't have CCTV.
Mrs Saunderson warns the problem is likely to get worse, with the government's waste levy rising from $10 to $60 a tonne over the next 4 years.
Most people that illegally dump are doing it because of cost, and it's much easier for them to pull off to the side of the road and dispose of it irresponsibly. So if that cost rises, I anticipate that illegal dumping will rise as well.
Heather Saunderson suggests there should be a lower evidential threshold for infringements, with a warning fine for a first offence followed by a fine. But she says education is the most effective strategy, and Keep New Zealand Beautiful won't be able to do much of that this year as it's received no government funding. The Ministry for the Environment says it's in the early stages of reviewing waste legislation, including the Waste Minimisation and Litter Act, but the scope has yet to be finalised. It expects consultation will begin next year. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
And so many of you getting in touch about Rose the ghost at the Vulcan Hotel. So let's get to some of your feedback. Mike says, was at a birthday party at the Vulcan some years back. Around midnight, went outside for a ciggy. Two of us smoked and looked up the road. I saw a woman in a long dress and a hat pushing a bicycle up the street. After she left, I said to the girl who was with me, "Did you see that lady?" Then we both said, well, it's a swear word, that was a ghost. Still think that it really was. Mike, was it just tobacco you were smoking? Someone else says the ghost of Rose lives in room 2 at the Vulcan Hotel at St Bathans. Rose targets males who feel like they're having a heart attack, but it's the ghost of Rose sitting on their chests. That's from Martin. That doesn't sound too pleasant. And someone else says, I'm sorry to hear about the Vulcan Hotel. We honeymooned there 32 years ago, although my husband was pushed out of the bed by the resident ghost. She sounds like a really nasty piece of work, does Rose, although from that piece that we heard she was robbed and murdered. No wonder she feels aggrieved. And this last person we see says, we stayed a night in the hotel last month. We had a paranormal experience, electric blankets turning themselves on and off. I'm 65 years old and have a sceptical nature. Nothing like this has ever happened to us before. We'd only had a couple of drinks during the evening and alcohol was not a factor, says Graham from Auckland.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātau at DNA. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has hit out at the government's decision to keep the country at the current COVID alert levels, saying at this rate New Zealand could still be in partial lockdown at Christmas. Mr Peters, who was also the Deputy Prime Minister, invoked the agree to disagree provision in the Labour New Zealand First coalition today, after Cabinet decided the current alert settings would remain for another week. Mr Peters says the public is not being kept in the loop.
There are all sorts of statements being made now that weren't made way back when we did the first level shutdowns. And all we ask for is consistency, and also we're asking for them to tell us what the risks are. Because the way things are going, we could be doing this at Christmas time.
Meanwhile, Nationals leader says the level decisions are becoming political and she wants the Prime Minister to front up with the full health advice. Judith Collins says restrictions on the South Island have gone too long. The owner of Les Mills says making masks mandatory in gyms may help contain the coronavirus outbreak. It's been confirmed the person who went to the classes at Les Mills in Takapuna before testing positive is a healthcare worker at the country's only quarantine hotel. Health authorities have urged 89 close contacts who went to the classes there to self-isolate and get tested. The gym has been deep cleaned. Philip Mills says it has strict safety measures in place and making masks mandatory could help prevent the further spread of the virus.
We have suggested that people wear masks if they will, and I think, that would be perhaps the next step for the government. We'll see how this one goes.
Philip Mills says gym class teachers are among those isolating. Dilworth School has established a dedicated committee to oversee its response to historic abuse allegations revealed today. 6 men, now in their 60s and 70s with former links to the school, have been charged with indecent assault and other charges, many relating to underage boys. The allegations date back to the 1970s through to the 2000s. Dan Reddick says the school's number one priority is the well-being of the students, and they've chosen to tackle these allegations head-on.
Dilworth School chose to waive name suppression. The purpose in doing so was to acknowledge our past and to provide ourselves a platform to speak openly to our school community about historical issues and to assure them of the safety of their children in the Dilworth of today.
Dan Reddick says no one charged is still involved with the school. An increased age rating and a warning has been placed ahead of a new documentary showing brief clips of the mosque attacks. The social media dilemma started screening in this country on Netflix late last week with no warning and a 7 years plus rating. After a complaint, the chief censor David Shanks asked Netflix to raise the age to 13 and include a warning saying it contains scenes from the shootings. He is happy that has now happened and says the film will make a positive contribution to the debate around social media.
The intention of this documentary is absolutely not to increase aggression or radicalisation. It's actually highlighting some of the risk factors with social media and internet content.
David Shanks says he asked for the mosque scenes to be removed, but Netflix declined to do this. National's education spokesperson says the party is being ambitious in its proposal to lower class sizes and increase teacher aides. Nicola Willis and leader Judith Collins unveiled the party's $1.9 billion education policy this afternoon in Christchurch. As part of the proposed policy, Ms Willis says National would invest $150 million over 4 years to fund nearly 6 million additional hours of teacher aide support.
We are very ambitious to lower class sizes, to lower ratios in early learning and to increase the number of teacher aides. So we will be supporting our tertiary training providers to both attract and train new teachers, but also supporting schools and early childhood services to retain their existing workforce.
The National Party education spokesperson Nicola Willis. The owners of a haunted Otago hotel say they're heartbroken it's closed after a business deal went awry. The Vulcan Hotel is a popular paranormal destination located in the once bustling gold mining town of St Bathans. Owner Jude Kavanagh says someone was lined up to lease to buy the hotel, but they walked away, taking the liquor licence with them. She says they were forced to close the hotel's doors last month for what's likely the first time since it opened in 1882. But Mrs Kavanagh says the Vulcan Hotel should be ready to reopen with a new lease in the next few weeks. A senior scientist from Australia's Northern Territory government says experts still need to decide how and if they'll remove a whale from 20 kilometres upstream in a river. The humpback is one of 3 that originally swam upriver in the crocodile-infested East Alligator River in Kakadu National Park. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Phoenix captain Stephen Taylor has surprisingly parted ways with 2 years still to run on his contract with the A-League Football Club. The 34-year-old joined the Wellington side in July 2018 following a 14-year career with Newcastle United in the English Premier League. In January, he signed a 2-year contract extension, but a club statement says the Phoenix and Taylor have mutually agreed to part ways. Taylor says he leaves with a heavy heart but didn't offer an explanation for the sudden departure. Having dedicated his life to winning a Grand Slam tennis title, Austrian Dominic Thiem says victory at the US Open is a sign that more of the sport's biggest prizes are set to come his way. Thiem had lost his 3 previous Grand Slam finals, 2 to Rafa Nadal and 1 to Novak Djokovic, and it appeared he had squandered another chance when Germany's Alexander Zverev won the first 2 sets of the men's singles final at Flushing Meadows. But Thiem staged a stunning comeback to win in a 5-set marathon lasting over 4 hours, and he says never counted himself out.
I said myself, I'm playing bad, I'm way too tight, legs are heavy, arms are heavy, but I always had hope and the expectation that at one point I free up, and luckily it was not too late.
Dominic Thiem. And the Denver Nuggets have beaten the Los Angeles Clippers 111-98 to force a 7th and deciding game in the NBA Basketball Western Conference semi-final series. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples a new album from Troy Kingi, an unearthed slice of 1981 Auckland post-punk, and David Long's soundtrack to the TV adaptation of Eleanor Catton's The Luminaries. James Nkise is eating fried chicken in the shower with radio host and cancer survivor Sarah Gandy, and this week's sportscaster Zoe George explains why she has trouble with leotards on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Warnings and watches are in place for severe westerly gales in central and southern New Zealand and for heavy rain affecting Westland and Bulla today. In the west from Northland to Porirua and the Hutt Valley, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and central high country, scattered light showers today, rain at times tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington City, fine weather, high cloud at times. Occasional showers south of Napier tomorrow. Bulla to Fiordland, also also Canterbury High Country and Stewart Island. Rain or showers, heavy at times. Squally thunderstorms and hail possible in Fiordland from this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough excluding Kaikoura Coast. Occasional showers from tonight. Kaikoura Coast, Canterbury Plains, Otago and Southland. Fine, high cloud at times. Occasional showers for Southland and Otago spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Social distancing restrictions on public transport have been ditched effective immediately, meaning airlines can fill their planes to capacity, as can buses, in time for the school holidays. And all but Auckland could drop down to Alert Level 1 next Monday when Cabinet reassesses the alert gradings, also in time for the end of Term 3. But the Prime Minister says any move is absolutely dependent on coronavirus cases tracking as they are and also being contained. A drop in alert levels would mean the cap of 100 people at gatherings is lifted. So is all of that good enough for business? Well, joining me now is Craig Douglas, Acting GM and Chair of the Queenstown Chamber of Commerce. Good evening, Craig. Do you like the look of the plan?
Good evening, Lisa. Certainly there was some good news in the plan, particularly around that social distancing on the aircraft. That was a big gain for Queenstown businesses.
And the bad news is what for you?
Well, I think, the not so good news is that we've still got Auckland particularly being at level 2.5. It has some practical implications, but it also has a blow on people's confidence just to make plans to move freely around the country.
So can you spell that out for me a bit more? How does it materially affect you down there and business down there if Auckland is still at level 2.5 or even at level 2?
Well, our businesses here are a vast majority of our businesses are reliant on visitors to Queenstown. Our only big market now that we can draw from is Auckland. If Auckland people aren't travelling, the rest of New Zealand provides some good business to be had, but nothing like the scale that's required for our businesses to continue to be viable.
So are you agitating for all parts of the country to move together to level 1?
We would prefer everybody to be at level 1. That would be a much better outcome for us in Queenstown because it would give people that confidence and that ability to travel without the restrictions, and particularly around big groups and people like that, groups gathering in numbers. Conferences and events and those sorts of things aren't happening under this current circumstance.
But would it give them confidence? Because when the Prime Minister gave her speech today, when she announced this plan ahead, she also said that modelling shows that there is a 25% chance of cases moving outside of Auckland. Are you prepared to take that chance?
Well, I suppose that's a number that we just have to live with. Every business is going to have their own opinion on that, and there certainly are people here in Queenstown who would prefer Aucklanders didn't come. But for businesses to operate, we need visitors, they need customers, and so many of our customers come out of Auckland that it's important for us to have them travelling again.
So what level of risk are you prepared to tolerate?
Oh, look, I don't know how we would even be able to measure that. This is the difficulty that I think everybody faces, including the government in their decision-making, is what is risk, what's acceptable risk. It's such an unknown that it's impossible to actually put a number on that.
So does the Chamber agree with an elimination strategy?
The Chamber agrees with, good outcomes for business. Now, we're being told that health is the right way to get a good outcome for business in the long term, and that's the path that we're on. We'd all prefer that we didn't have to do that, but if that's what we're doing right now, then that's what we've got to put up with.
So are you saying, basically, well, what I'm hearing there, Craig, is that you're sucking it up because this is what you've been told is the plan, but actually you don't necessarily support, you wouldn't choose elimination as a strategy if you had a choice. Is that fair?
Well, we don't know whether there are other choices. Those haven't been explored, or if they have, they certainly haven't been offered as an option or an alternative to the plan that we're currently following.
So what would you like to see in terms of a long-term plan? So obviously we've got a plan for next week. Beyond that, what would you like?
Yeah, I think the difficulty that we all face at the moment is understanding what happens in light of a vaccine being a long way off or maybe even not being ever discovered. That's the uncertain piece that I'd like to see some answers for.
So are you suggesting that there should be a certain degree of tolerance for COVID cases in the community where we can still travel back and forth freely?
Well, I don't know if that's a viable alternative, but nobody's ever explored publicly what that might look like and whether that could be possible.
So who should be involved in that exploration, that coming up with the plan B, if you like?
Yeah, well, I would hope that government are doing that. You know, they're leading the charge. They're the people that can make the decisions. They're the people that can fund the circumstances that we face. Business can't do that.
But as tourism operators and businesses, do you have the confidence that someone in a back room is working through a plan just in case we don't get a vaccine for another 2 years and working through what happens with the border? Have you seen any evidence that is happening?
I'm unaware of any evidence of that work happening. If it's happening, then it may well be happening, but we don't know about it. We don't know what those outcomes might look like.
And what do you make of that then, if you're unaware of it?
Well, I prefer that we did know what was happening. If that is being thought about, I think if you're a business operator, you can't just aim for one outcome. You've always got to have a plan B, plan C, depending on circumstances that change. So at the moment, it appears that our plan that we're following is based on there being a vaccine at the end of it. If that timeline is too long, or if that actually doesn't eventuate, I would expect that there'd be a plan that accounts for that.
Would you be confident with some opening of the border right now to tourists?
Oh, look, I don't know enough about the variables that the health people are juggling in that regard. I think, we have to accept that they've given us their advice and that's where it sits right now.
Okay, let me put it another way. We talked about this modelling that says there's a 25% chance that a case of COVID could move outside of Auckland into another region. Could businesses in your area sustain another lockdown?
Many of them probably can't. Every day that they're operating under these sorts of restrictions that we have now, some of those businesses will be going backwards. They get to a point where there's nothing left in reserve for them to continue to operate, and so that they will be closing. Different businesses are in different circumstances. There's no one universal outcome that we can expect for all business.
And in your mind, does an elimination strategy mean inevitably that there will be more lockdowns?
It certainly sounds like that, and that's what we're being told, to expect that we will have the potential of more cases in the community and outbreaks in the community, and for that, the only solution at the moment is to lock down.
And would you support further lockdowns?
In the absence of an alternative, I don't think we've got any choice but to support them. We prefer not to have them, but how else are we going to deal with it? I don't know. That's the question. Are there alternatives? But we don't know if there are. So
for you, in summary, Craig, what's been announced today, is that a bit of, how would you sum it up? Out of 10, 1 being a stellar plan for what happens next.
Out of 10, it's probably middle of the road. We got some respite with the public transport not having social distancing restrictions and people wearing masks. That's a big gain for us. But then the offset with that is that we're now another week before we actually know if we're going to be moving a level. And in particular, we know where Auckland might be operating at, because our own circumstance here is one thing, but we're just as reliant on people from Auckland for a lot of our businesses, that whatever's happening in Auckland is just as important to us.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Craig Douglas, who's the acting GM and chair of Queenstown Chamber of Commerce. It's been confirmed the person who attended 3 gym classes in Auckland before testing positive for COVID-19 is a healthcare worker at the country's only quarantine hotel. It's likely the worker contracted the virus at the Jet Park near Auckland Airport, but exactly how is still being investigated by health officials. Authorities have urged 89 close contacts who attended gym classes at Takapuna's Les Mills to self-isolate and get tested. Amy Williams filed this report.
One knee, one check. Go.
Going to a Les Mills class at level 2.5 is a different experience for its regular gym goers. The fans are turned off, saunas closed, water fountains off limits, and classes are limited to 100 people who have to keep 2 metres apart. Owner Philip Mills says they follow Exercise NZ's guidelines and more.
We've gone to great detail to make it safe to come into the gyms, from having big perspex shields in front of the receptionists, all of the staff being masked, from having perspex shields between the machines.
Of the 89 close contacts who attended classes at the Takapuna gym last Wednesday and Thursday, 20 were in the sprint class, while a total of 69 attended body combat. They've been urged to get tested and self-isolate. Mr Mills says the class teachers are among those isolating.
We have suggested that people wear masks if they will, and I think, that would be perhaps a next step for the government. We'll see how this one goes.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says routine testing of managed isolation and quarantine workers picked up the healthcare worker had COVID-19. According to the Ministry of Health, the worker has 5 household contacts who have all returned negative test results. Those still heading to Les Mills today were not exactly working up a sweat over the risk of COVID. Rob felt relaxed about going back to pump iron.
They got a pretty good tracing system, and I wasn't in that class, so it was pretty safe, I reckon. Everyone's wiping down all over the place. Everyone stays their distance apart.
Amelia took her own towel as a precaution and stayed on one exercise machine.
I'm feeling safe, usually stay in one spot when I'm exercising on the treadmill, so feel comfortable there. Usually they clean around.
Des says he felt confident in the gym's safety measures.
The gym is run really well. There's plenty of space between machines and people, and I think they look after us pretty well.
There are now 177 cases in the Auckland cluster, and tomorrow health authorities will be able to confirm if any of the 89 close contacts have tested positive. The Ministry of Health announced 1 new community case of COVID-19 today, a girl who's been in isolation for a fortnight and is linked to an existing case. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
Aucklanders will be forced to tolerate strict gathering rules for at least another week with the extension of the level 2.5 restrictions. The rules mean gatherings in the region are limited to 10 people, while the rest of New Zealand can enjoy events of up to 100 people. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Munro hit the Auckland CBD to gauge reaction to today's extension of COVID-19 restrictions. First, they spoke to an Auckland business owner who says his livelihood could dry up if level 2.5 restrictions extend beyond next Monday when they're set to be reviewed.
It's going to be more quiet, and it's quiet anyway, and I can see people don't care anymore these days. I can see them, so many of them in the gym, and it's Friday, Saturday nights, they're still going out. There's no bars or nightclubs, but still going out. Yeah, I think it's better to go level 1, because it looks like it's level 1, but it's not level 1.
Is this your business? How's it been running at level 2?
It's really bad. It's really bad. Especially all my neighbours closed down and gone. So it did big effect for me, yeah. If it stays another level 2, another 2-3 weeks, I wouldn't survive. No.
So level 1 can't come soon enough, basically?
I can't wait, man. I can't wait.
Of course, I would wish we could go to level 1, but I think it's the right decision to stay at level 2, just to be sure that COVID is out of the country soon again, hopefully.
As far as I'm concerned, honestly, as long as we have cases active and there is proof that it is spreading through the community, I think that we should stay on level 2. And we should move to level 1 only when we can safely manage it like the last time. Like if we can safely contain it, make sure that it stays in the quarantine areas, then yeah, that's the only time we should really move to level 1.
So would it be fair to say, in your opinion, as long as it's in the community, we should be cautious, we should be at level 2?
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with the whole keep us at level 2 as long as, as Auckland shows that it's spreading through the community, keep us at level 2. Keep everyone safe,
2.5 is probably fair enough given, what happened there over the weekend with the gym coming out. So, I don't think we've got much choice.
And in terms of moving to level 1, do you think we should be cautious or do you think we should be looking to get there as soon as possible? What's sort of your view on that?
I think probably as soon as possible would be the way to go. We need to open up the city again and get things going. So, definitely get to level 1 as soon as possible.
The rest of the country level 2 for another week. Do you think that's the right call? Do you think we should be or the rest of the country should be at level 1 already?
No, I'm quite happy for it to be at level 2 for another week, but I believe, because I'm from south of Christchurch, that we are ready to go to level 1. Absolutely.
And do you think, most of your fellow South Islanders, or the ones that you know anyway, feel the same way about going to level 1?
Yes, I do, because I really don't think they feel committed to level 2.
Right, but I think no longer than a week.
Is that the mood down in Palmerston North again amongst the people you know, that we're ready to go to level 1?
Yes, because we're in that very fortunate position of not having COVID in the city, in the area. I think we're ready for it, absolutely.
The quick action of some nearby fishers helped to save boats docked in Milford Sound after a vessel caught on fire early this morning. A recreational fishing boat used for accommodation has been completely destroyed after it went up in flames. Alicia Foon reports.
Shane Nyan and his fishing crew had come in from crayfishing when they noticed a burning boat and bright orange flames from a nearby vessel on Fisherman's Wharf in Deepwater Basin just before 4 o'clock this morning. According to Shane's wife, Amber Nyan, they sprang into action, calling fire and emergency and supporting them when they arrived.
They smelled smoke and then saw the fire start. So he rang me at about 6 o'clock this morning to say that one of his neighbouring boats had gone on fire and they'd been awake all night trying to help the fire crew and also to save one of the other boats that was moored right beside them.
And while fire officers battled the blaze on the boat, Mrs. Nyan says her husband and his crew managed to save another vessel from also burning.
Shane obviously couldn't do anything to actually put out the fire. However, he decided to jump over from his boat to the next boat, the Sovereign, and so it didn't go on fire. However, he fell in, so then his crew decided to try and cut the ropes to the mooring and actually ended up burning himself on his bum. And Shane got hauled out and they managed to tie the Sovereign up and haul it out away from the burning boat. So at least one got saved.
As a remote area in Fiordland, external help is at least 2 hours away, and with limited cell phone reception, volunteer firefighters and locals are used to having to tackle emergencies on their own. But backup came about 7 a.m, when a second fire crew from Te Anau were flown in by helicopter due to State Highway 94 being closed because of an avalanche risk. Meanwhile, Environment Southland's Harbour Master, Lyndon Cleaver, says the 11-metre recreational boat, which had been tied up for some time, has partially sunk. He says they plan on refloating the boat and removing it from the water by crane. But in the meantime, measures are in place to mitigate any oil spill.
We have oil spill booms in and around the boat to contain any possible out of the vessel, which I understand is a very minimal amount, and that's all been contained at the moment, any possible leaks. But luckily, the vessel wasn't an operational vessel, so it had a very minimal amount of fuel that was maybe sitting in the bottom of its fuel tanks.
He says Maritime New Zealand, Fiordland Marine Guardians and the Department of Conservation have been contacted. No one was on board at the time the fire broke out, and the cause of the blaze is being investigated. It is not being treated as suspicious. For Checkpoint, ko Alicia Foon, tēnei.
Pinocchio, it's a story that was written nearly 140 years ago, but it's still proving popular today, and a major studio is bringing out its own version next year. The BBC's Paul Moss takes a closer look at the story of the wooden puppet.
I was in the theatre of puppets. The school was closed. I was waiting for it to open.
The little boy has a strange face. There's something permanently downcast about his whole manner. He does live in rough conditions and is preyed on by local ne'er-do-wells out to exploit a vulnerable child. It sounds like a piece of gritty social realism, but this is a new film version of the famous fairy tale Pinocchio.
Careful, eh? You must walk properly, otherwise you'll fall and hurt yourself, eh? You have to be careful.
The film's director, Matteo Garrone, is best known for his hard-hitting portrait of the mafia, Gomorrah. And while his Pinocchio doesn't actually bump off his enemies or bury them in concrete, he's certainly not just a lovable little kid.
We try to remain faithful to this masterpiece of literature and to make a Pinocchio that could be an opportunity for the kids to discover and at the same time an opportunity for the adult to go back to childhood.
I didn't see anyone.
Pinocchio certainly does have some adult themes, how children can be led astray, how parents may feel powerless to control the thing they've created. And then, of course, there's what famously happens to his nose when Pinocchio tells lies. It's no surprise, perhaps, that's something written about by psychoanalysts of a Freudian bent. A boy growing up who has a long protuberance sticking out of him, which gets bigger and bigger.
What's going on with my nose? Oh, no, nothing, you see. You've told some lies, that's why your nose is growing. And careful where you point it.
It's not just telling lies that gets Pinocchio into trouble. He hangs out with the wrong type of people. He smokes cigarettes. Indeed, the story's author, Carlo Collodi, intended this to be a serious morality tale. It was published in 1883, a time when Italy was still emerging from the wars of unification. And Collodi thought his story of Pinocchio could play a part in this process.
Paul Moss reporting there. Let's get to your feedback on the levels. This person says, lock up Auckland, 3 exclamation marks. Keep them out of the South Island. Another listener says, not a good idea to have different levels across New Zealand just before the holidays as well. Aucklanders could inadvertently spread COVID, putting all we have achieved at risk. On packed yoga classes, this person says, we've got a limit of 10. It's extravagantly cautious, and Minister Robertson is inconsistent with what he was saying about limitations on gyms, and that is from Ray. Check out our stories online. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government says physical distancing restrictions on public transport, including planes, were dropped on the advice of the Director-General of Health. National leader Judith Collins is concerned the alert level decisions are becoming political, and she wants the Prime Minister to front up with the full health advice. The police have apologised for allowing a child who was part of a family court case to fly out of the country. And a dedicated committee will oversee Dilworth School's response to the historical abuse allegations revealed today. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I believe he would have been acting as like a leader in the management of the Gulf Livestock One, and I